we are talking today about Singularity, organization called Singularity Net, focused on AI development, and they're also looking at decentralized governance. I've listened to a few fresh podcasts. Dom has been looking at China, and so we've got some updates to share. I'm going to start off with this. Andrew Ng, who I watched a Stanford talk by him, he says that AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is when the idea is that it basically becomes smarter than us and it can write its own code, right? That's my general understanding. You might have more depth to put on there, but AGI is when the AI is so sophisticated, it can write its own code and self-correct and optimize, and it just generally becomes smarter than us at that point. And that's on the road to singularity, which is where things change in society so fast that we can't mentally keep up. So Andrew Ng says that he thinks it's something like 50 years or more until we get to AGI.
Huh.
And there I'm watching Ben Goertzel, the CEO of Singularity Net, on a conference recorded just a few months ago. He said he thinks it's 4 to 5 years. And Ray Kurzweil, the chief futurist at Google, who came up with this concept of singularity, he's predicting AGI, or what he calls super intelligent AGI, super intelligence, in 6 years, 2029. So you've got Ben Goertzel, 4 to 5 years, Kurzweil, 6 years, and Andrew Ng, 50 years or more. It's just interesting. Like, who knows? It's just opinions, right? And they can justify them. But it's interesting to see that there's such a big difference in perspective about us achieving AGI. My sentiment is, like, as Ben Goertzel explained it, he said, there's so much to do between now and then. It seems like a really, really, really far off thing. But when you take into account the geometric curve of innovation, then it ends up seeming slow at first and suddenly you're already there. That's his perspective. So Andrew Ng is thinking more like linearly or something, and Ben's thinking more geometrically in terms of the progressions that will come about. Kurzweil is not that much longer than what Ben's saying. So I just found that an interesting observation. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, this is interesting. I check this stuff regularly, and even 2 years ago, because I've been in this stuff for a while. Certainly, like anytime something would come on my feed about AI, I would read about it, and it all sounded like 2050 or more, right? This was probably 2 to 3 years ago. Everybody was like 20 years, 30 years, right? Then ChatGPT happened. And all of a sudden, everybody was like, "What? Oh, wait a minute!" Right? I'm reading one here. This is Science and something, I forget, SSRN. They've got, as of June 30th, so this is relatively soon or relatively new, predicting the expected arrival date of AGI. It's a bit of a sort of pseudo research paper, and they're saying likely close. The average predicted date to get reasonably close is 2034. So there you go. That's 11 years, with a likely range of 2027 to 2041. So like you're saying, many people are thinking it's, 3, 4, 5 years away. It looks like a good amount of people think it's around 10. And then there's your outliers who think it's 20 or more. But, that's very telling. I mean, I think you can put your hat on 10 years. I'm with Goertzel and some of the other cats. I just think it's sooner. I think you can make a case that what's LLMs, ChatGPT 4, Google Gemini, which is coming out soon, I think they're damn near close. They do things that they didn't train them to do. They speak languages. They never trained them to do that. The coding thing came out of nowhere. That was a side effect. They didn't train it to code. Just from all the code that had been put through it, it figured it out. So what does that start to tell you, man?
Yeah, it's like if you write a self-referential optimization improvement prompt and give it to us, the large language model that can add data sources to its own knowledge graph,
Mhm.
then how is that not AGI at that point? If the concept of AGI is that it's able to self-optimize and write it and decide what to write and develop its own code, as long as it can connect the dots, it's got to have access to hosting applications. It's got to just connect those dots, but it doesn't really seem like a far stretch.
Nope.
Um, it's just enabling
Nope.
those pieces of the puzzle, and it's like, why can't that happen already, like this year? I don't know.
I'm gonna bet too, right? Whatever we're seeing is not the latest and greatest, right? There
Yeah.
are things behind closed doors in places. I have to assume the US government, for example, and other major powers have some crazy stuff going on, right? Maybe not quite sentient, but I mean, I'm sure the military AIs almost act like human generals, right? Like
Yeah.
with their strategy and their targeting and the way they can process data, and because I know that they have AIs who run the swarm drones,
Mhm.
right? Stuff like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot there, man. And I think it's closer than people think. I really think the people who say it's farther out, usually when I dig deeper, they typically have different definitions. They have like a harder definition,
Mhm.
like the thing's got to have a name and wear a top hat or something.
Mhm.
And then or you can tell there's an undertone that they're skittish about it, and they just want to say it's farther off. They're just
Mhm.
kind of scared. Like they don't want to tell themselves it's sooner than, 5 years away or whatever. I don't know. Just this little small insight. But tell me more. What else? You were into something else. What else were you sniffing around?
Yeah.
Something
Couple
with
of things.
singularity you were working on, right?
Singularity net. There was also I listened to a podcast with Erik, what's his name, Voorhees or
Hmm.
some
I know him, the
one of
original. He's one of the original Bitcoin
the
dudes.
original. Yeah, that was really interesting. I don't know if we want to go down that Bitcoin rabbit hole, but
Let's do it.
he's he's very he's very anti-regulation,
Yeah, I know. He's one
but
of the
he's
original
not.
crypto anarchists.
But he's not anti-rules,
Okay.
which is the interesting
Explain
distinction.
the difference. What's the
Well,
distinction?
my good friend Sterling Luan, one of the really bright minds, charismatic, like just really good-hearted guy. I'd love to get him into one of our conversations at some point.
Let's do it.
Um, he is self-described anarchist,
Yeah.
and he educated me to explain that a long time ago that anarchy does not mean chaos
Right.
as they portray in Hollywood. It doesn't even mean no rules. What it means is etymologically is no rulers,
No rulers. Right.
right? So if there's no rulers, we still have rules, and I'm pretty sure I don't know if Erik Voorhees would consider himself an anarchist, but maybe with that definition he would. He's basically saying that code, smart contracts, the Bitcoin protocol, they are rules, and they allow us to interact with each other to eliminate things like fraud or to enable contracts and agreements and facilitate stuff between willing participants. He says, therefore, we just need to get rid of the SEC, which is trying to impose its own rules against people's voluntary consent to participate in economic systems and allow the rule based system of smart contracts to facilitate. And then it will be a free and fair system.
Hmm.
Um, this is essentially the direction and the nature. So it was a nice interview. Really got a clear perspective. He says that still Bitcoin is probably the most viable cryptocurrency because it's oldest,
Sure.
more proven, more established, cleaner code, simpler code than some of these new things. There's less attack vectors. But he also likes Ethereum a lot because of the smart contract enablement that it can do. He ran Shapeshift, which was one of the first non-custodial Bitcoin exchanges.
Yep.
And the regulators basically came to him, most of all from the US, but also others. And they said, you need to do KYC or we're going to arrest you. So he started doing KYC, and then Uniswap came along, which was a decentralized exchange. And then he basically replaced the back end of Shapeshift with a decentralized backend, and then closed the company, the Shapeshift company. So therefore, no one is liable for what Shapeshift does as a non-custodial, fully decentralized exchange. And he called it a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. He sees a DAO as not having a legal entity.
Hmm.
He says if you're a DAO and then you go and get a jurisdictional legal entity, you're no longer a DAO, basically, which is another also interesting perspective. He sees the decentralization and the autonomy as beyond the clutches of government regulators. That's for him a defining factor.
Okay. That's interesting. So then is he one of these cats who thinks like, this DAO, this self-organizing DAO should have any special rights or privileges? Like what's so the DAO does bad. Was there anything in there about how he says he
Well,
feels that should go?
well, the interviewer, Niklas, I forget his surname, Zingler. Niklas Anzingar. Niklas Anzingar is a very, very cool guy. I really like Niklas Anzingar. He's doing a lot of things that I would love to be doing. He's doing longevity. He's running a VC. He's longevity. He's visiting Prospera. He's
Nice.
involved with all of the decentralized, Vita DAO, and speaking with Vitalik Buterin, and he went to a conference and with those guys recently, and he's just really doing good stuff. And he was interviewing Erik, and he posed the point to Erik. Well, what about arbitration if something goes wrong with the smart contract? There might be a bug in the code, and you lose someone's money, or it doesn't work in the way it's supposed to. So how do you arbitrate? And Erik said, Erik agreed that, yeah, if it's fraud, then you need to pass that on to the authorities. The legitimate reason for a state or regulate like government bodies, and I agree with that as well, is force or fraud. Those are the reasons to have a centralized national state, is to protect people from force and fraud. Beyond that, Niklas' idea was interesting, that you could have entities that, and he didn't use the word insurance, but that's the way that I see it. Is there entities that serve as insurance for things that go wrong? So they will vet the
Yeah.
code smart contracts, and if something goes wrong, then they themselves become liable to correct their oversight of not protecting the system. So it just does away with this regulatory obsolete paradigm of governments trying to supposedly protect the people while they just enrich themselves and suppress innovation. So this is where my head's at. I think it fully aligns with cypherpunk, the origins, or CryptoPunk, the origin. What was it? Cypherpunk, yeah, the origins of crypto philosophy. So it was good listening with Erik Voorhees. Recommended Niklas Anzingar. If you go and check his podcast out, it's pretty good stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, like this force of fraud. Force of fraud. Okay, I can get that. I can get that.
This relates to
Hmm.
what's called by a group the prime law, which basically says there's a beautiful constitution. It's very succinct. We're getting into the political realm here, but it says Article 1 of this constitution is no individual group can initiate force, fraud, or coercion, which is the threat of force, against any other individual or group, right? So Article 1, no force or fraud. Article 2 is then force is justified to defend against those who violate Article 1.
Mm.
So if someone initiates force against you or fraud, then you have a right to defend yourself. And then Article 3 is that there's no exceptions to Articles 1 and 2. So it's really, it's like, and that's it. That's the entire Constitution. So it's very succinct, very clear, very specific, down to just those two factors of force and fraud.
Okay.
And so out of that, you can have a legal system, which is protecting contract law, and you have a police system, which helps people against violence and corruption in terms of fraud. And that's it. All of the other welfare programs get taken care about by the free market. Because they're bureaucratic when done by Milton Friedman had a beautiful quote. He says, "Who are these angels that you think are going to do such an amazing job just because they're inside of government to provide all of the stuff? Where are these angels coming from? Just allow the market to do it because they're still made up of people, but in the market they have to be competitive against other options, and so they're going to do a leaner, cleaner, better job than just a bureaucracy of government that is funded through force-backed taxation." So there's my political colors coming
There
through
it
on the
is.
podcast.
We're revolutionaries over here. No, 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 no. I get that. I get that. Look, you put together a decentralized smart contract for an insurance policy, say for your community. Let's say it's just going to be a bad weather policy. It's one of those things that it's hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, whatever. Acts of nature that are you can't possibly predict or do anything about. And you guys are all contributing X amount to the premium. You've done hired an actuary to kind of do the numbers. You're going to really care about what's in that thing. You're going to be really, really interested in all the little details and every part of it and exactly how much it's going to cost and how it's going to pay out because you were involved. You were there. And it affects you directly. This is something you want to do for yourself, your family, whatever. Whereas, I know one of the things that stuck out to me so much from what is it? Is it Nassim Taleb? His Skin in the Game book uh, is all about this idea that he's like politicians are terrible because they don't have skin in the game. It's like the things that they are typically working on don't affect them,
Mhm.
don't matter to them. They're either, exempt or above it in some way or rich enough or whatever that, they're making policies like welfare that they're never going to use, that no one in their family's probably ever going to use or ever has used. And so, how can they relate to the idea that it's completely humiliating to do food stamps like we do in the US? That's a program we do for poor people to get food. And there's all these restrictions because there was all this hysteria, which was totally unfounded bullshit, that there were these welfare queens. It's actually come out that this was made up. This was actually a publicity stunt by the United States government hiring a PR agency to create this narrative of these welfare queens back in the 70s that just take all the government money and sit on their asses and watch TV all day. Not true, not true, not true. But because of this hysteria and because these politicians are so out of touch, they have all these weird rules. You can't buy Cheez-Its. You can only buy chips, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. You can't use them for this. And what happens is it's just such a humiliating experience. This person's got to go in and like just flash to the cashier that they're poor as shit. I'm going to pay in food stamps today. And of course, the grocery stores have to go through all this bullshit and it's long and it always holds up the line. It's humiliating. But again, that's only someone who doesn't have to live that would come up with a policy like that, right? Anybody who's ever lived it or knows somebody who has or is still living it would never do it that way. They'd come up with a different option. So I don't know. To finish that off, well, maybe I don't know. Speaking of shitty government,
Hmm.
my thing was my girl actually showed this to me this morning. Just this information about China using AI to help their police round up 17,000 people in a matter of days. And they're putting them in these basically concentration camps. And they call them, reformative or whatever. I forget the name for it, but, rehab camps. And what it is, people have probably heard of, this has been in the news a fair amount, but China's used AI to create this reputation system, basically.
Social credit scoring.
Social credit system, exactly. Thank you, Gav. I was just about to stumble over that, actually. So the social credit system, it's been in place for a while. For those of you who don't know about it, you have to give them, they asked for a lot of information from everybody that they volunteered to opt in. So they gave them lots of information about themselves. I think stuff like bank statements, private home pictures, all this stuff, right? That they asked these folks to like upload to an account. Then, of course, they've got all their other information. And then the AI, of course, once you're signed up, starts, gathering your data constantly every day. The point being that if you're a good, upstanding citizen who obeys the law, you've got nothing to hide, nothing to worry about, you will be rewarded with little gifts and trinkets or whatever, and so forth. Well, it also turns out that they've used this AI to round up what they think are perceived troublemakers. One of the criteria is you have a beard. So Gav, we're done. We're fucked. We're in the camps. Because the beard implies that you probably are a terrorist. You want to talk about racial profiling, right?
What?
Unbelievable.
Well, there is something interesting there in psychology. It says that the idea is subconsciously that you're hiding your face, so therefore you have something to hide. So it's interesting. Police profiling and that kind of thing use that concept. So they've adapted it literally. That's interesting.
So, yeah. So, and anyway, and it's lots of other silly little things. You purchased a certain kind of magazine in the last week. Oh, if you have a copy of the Quran, you're done. So it was a lot of very anti-Muslim kind of, racist sentiment towards, people of the Muslim faith. But what was astounding was at first, the cops were just like, well, how are we going to find, it was 20,000 people apparently to start. Like, how are we going to find all these people? Like there's people who like have moved or who are away or, this thing doesn't exactly track everybody perfectly for some reason. I'm not quite sure why you would think that it would be monitoring all that stuff, but I guess it quite doesn't. But they still end up getting 17,000 people in a matter of a couple of days. And those people are, by all accounts, going to die.
Yeah, well, what I saw a video. It's hard to know exactly what to believe, and that's another theme that we can come to, especially for the US elections. There's going to be so much use of fake AI. What do you call it? Like just what do you call it?
It'll be fake news, but then it's also deep fakes is what they call it when they use the faces. Yeah.
The deep fake. We'll come to that as another topic. But anyway, I saw this video showing that a guy in China had to go through a barrier to go from one zone to another zone. And not only did he have to present his ID or something, but the camera checked that he was smiling.
Okay.
He had to smile to be allowed through the barrier, because then it proves that he's a happy citizen. If this is new to you and you think like this is crazy, just go and look at the news that Dom has shared of 17,000 being arrested for things like having a beard. And just extrapolate out. Come on, wake up. Don't be so. So you said politicians not having skin in the game, right? Mm-hmm. Andrew Yang, I remember on his interview with Peter Diamandis, he said that 60% of a lot of US politicians' time is spent on re-election.
Yep.
So their skin in the game is getting re-elected.
Yep.
That's their skin in the game. So what they're doing for we the people is like 30-40% supposedly, which is done to say that they've done something so that they can go and spend 60% of their time campaigning on
the next election. I've heard
So
it's 6 months. It's said I have a friend who actually worked for, the mayor of Baltimore and eventually governor of Baltimore, was part of his campaign management team. He said 6 months. 6 months legislation, 3.5 years of fundraising. He also worked for congressman, from Maryland. Yeah. 6 months of legislation, that's it.
so if that's not inefficient to you, or if it doesn't scream like
Yeah.
they're just
Ridiculous.
self-interested and they're self-serving to you, then look at China, because that's where we're heading next.
Right.
Um, yeah, this got dark politically pretty quick. It didn't take us long to like fall down the rabbit hole of getting into the depths of
No,
political
no, 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 but what's the
madness.
solution, right? Can we bring it around? Where's the light? The light is in things like decentralization. The light is in things like self-organizing organisms, right? It's like, guys, we have to evolve culturally too. You can't expect your technology to just keep exponentially growing and you do this as a culture. Social
Love it.
bullshit. It doesn't work. We have to
Mm.
go with it. I've said for years, part of why I think Web3 hasn't taken off is that the Web3 technologies have certain core values just embedded in them, interwoven. They're foundational, like decentralization, transparency. Like these things are fundamental to these technologies, and you need your company to embody those values, right? That's why I think DAOs finally coming forth are going to be better suited, or some version of a DAO to do a Web3 type startup. It just makes more sense. It's
Well,
alignment.
that's a good segue to the topic I wanted to introduce right at the start, which was this quote from Esther Galfalvi at the Singularity Net on the Decentralized Summit. She said, and this is what I highlighted: managing of the human element in the DAO. So again, a DAO is a decentralized organization, which Erik sees as not a legal entity. I think we generally we agree, but he sees it as if you have a legal entity, then you're just not able to be a DAO. He sees it as autonomous, using smart contracts, fully automated, basically. But there's the rest of us that are living in organizational systems of collaborating with people. And this is a lot of what we do with Hypha as a platform for DAOs. She makes the point, Esther, again, managing of the human element in the DAO. She says that has been missing. That has been a
Yep.
big gap in what DAOs have been able to do until now. And and she sees it as being very different to the governance layer. Is Let me just read a little bit here. So if there's no proper coordination of the different teams, not enough coordination between the teams, and if it's not organized very well, then she says engagement can drop. We know that from our experience looking at how DAOs are operating that we're close to. So it's all about that human element. And I think that speaks to what you're saying, Dom, about waking up politically. We have to put our human values and our human passion and interest and thrivability, a term that we use in Haifa, to the forefront, because otherwise we're going to get overrun by politicians who are spending 60% just trying to get reelected instead of doing their job, and we're allowing them to drive the bus, and they're driving it for themselves and not to look after us in the back seats.
Yep, 100%. That human element's huge. One of the things, the challenges of the DAO is the fact that it is decentralized, right? One of its strengths, but any strength can easily become a weakness. And what you can see happen is no one just takes responsibility for even simple things like onboarding new members, right? People need to be shepherded in just like any other organization. That doesn't change. They need to know where to go. They need to know their way around the place, right? Where do I go for resources? Get the basics done so they're not asking a million questions in the Discord or whatever you use to talk. And then absolutely, like the team, these are still people, guys. They don't suddenly become like mining nodes, because they enter DAO. Like there's still a culture. There's still like HR functionality that has to be preserved or created, developed. Is it going to be probably a little different than a traditional corp? Of course, but there has to be these functions, they don't just like it. My problem with DAOs and Web3 so far is like they're like magic. People wear them like magic hats. They think they can go into a DAO and it's like a magic hat that then makes them immune to the world. I don't need companies. I don't need this. I don't need HR. I don't need to do anything. I throw everybody in a DAO, create a couple of smart contracts, make $1 billion, call it a day, right? Like, guys, no, these are new tools, but there's still certain functions that need to be handled. And so, but I think we're going to have to take this into our own hands. If we're going to sit around and wait for our political, bodies and elected officials around the world to prepare us for this new technology, we're going to be in for a lot of pain. So let's not. Let's keep listening to Gavin Dom and form a virtual nation state. We'll tell you how someday,
Yeah.
next time.
Oh, that's going to be a good rabbit hole to go down as
Let's
well.
do it.
Thanks for that.
The virtual nation state podcast. I'll put it on our topics, and we
Yeah.
will certainly get into that for you guys. But I think let's wrap this one up, Gav. All right, close it out. Closing thoughts.
Oh boy. So I started off with this difference between AGI. So wherever you are on the spectrum, whether it's going to be 5 years until you're obsolete or 50 years until you're obsolete, you don't have to, or if politicians are going to steal your lunch, progressively for the next five. What Erik was saying real quick is that we're in dangerous times. He was really trying to make that point. And, um, the optimistic side of me has to say that, some people are going to suffer
Sure.
and others are going to suffer more than others. And some people, if they just ask the questions, if they take the moves, if they apply themselves, like we're trying to do, then there's an opportunity to thrive. And on the other side of this general collapse in confidence of governments and the structures of governments and the fiat currencies that have just eroded the value of our worth, then there's a bright future on the other side. We have to get through it, and we'll keep. That is the ultimate exit strategy: is to avoid the calamities that are before us by making the adjustments we need to make, educating ourselves, keeping focused, and we're going to get through it. One and all.
Awesome. Thank you, Gav. I love it. We'll talk to everybody soon.